The morning Miss Helena Gray arrived at Blackwood Manor, the rain was falling in sheets so thick that she could barely see the house until she was nearly upon it. The hired chaise had been making its slow, laborious way up the long drive for nearly an hour, the horses struggling against the mud, the driver cursing under his breath, and Helena had spent most of that time staring out the window at the endless expanse of parkland that seemed to go on forever. She had never seen such a place. The trees were ancient oaks, their branches twisted and gnarled, their leaves a deep, dark green that seemed almost black in the rain. The grass was thick and wet, and the drive itself was little more than a ribbon of mud that wound between the trees like a river. Beyond the trees, she could see glimpses of the moors, wild and empty, stretching out toward a horizon that was lost in the gray mist. It was beautiful in a bleak, desolate way. And it was the furthest thing from London that Helena had ever seen. She had been a governess for 5 years, moving from one household to another, never staying long enough to put down roots. She had grown used to the sound of children's voices, the smell of chalk dust and old books, the endless round of lessons and corrections and small patient kindnesses. She had grown used to being invisible, to being a piece of furniture that moved from room to room, to being treated with the same distant politeness that one might show a servant who had been in the family for years. She had not grown used to the loneliness that she suspected she would never grow used to. The chaise lurched to a stop, and Helena gathered her valise and her umbrella and stepped out into the rain. The house rose before her, a great, sprawling pile of gray stone that seemed to have been built by a madman with a passion for towers and turrets and battlements that served no purpose. It was Gothic in the extreme, all pointed arches and mullioned windows and a front door that might have come from a cathedral. The ivy crawled up the walls in thick, green ropes, and the windows were dark and empty, like the eyes of a skull. Helena took a breath, squared her shoulders and walked up to the door. It was opened by a butler of such imposing dignity that Helena felt instinctively that she ought to curtsy. He was tall and thin, with a face like a slab of granite and eyes that seemed to have been carved from the same stone. He looked at her as if she were a parcel that had arrived by mistake, and he said in a voice that could have frozen the Thames, "Miss Gray?" "Yes," Helena said, and she was proud of how steady her voice was. "I am Miss Gray, the new governess." The butler's expression did not change. "We were not expecting you until Thursday." "It is Thursday," Helena said, and she had to suppress a smile. "Unless I have lost a day somewhere between London and Yorkshire." The butler stared at her for a moment longer, and then he stepped back, allowing her to enter. "I shall inform Mrs. March that you have arrived. She will show you to your room." Helena stepped into the hall, and she felt the grandeur of the house close around her like a great, cold hand. The ceiling was high, the walls were paneled in dark wood, and a vast staircase rose at the far end, its banisters carved with the heads of animals that seemed to snarl at her as she passed. The floor was black and white marble, polished to a mirror shine, and the windows were tall and narrow, letting in the gray light of the rainy afternoon. She was still standing in the middle of the hall, her valise at her feet, when a woman appeared at the top of the staircase. She was middle-aged, with a round, pleasant face and a cap that was slightly askew. She was wearing an apron over her gray dress, and her hands were floury, as if she had been interrupted in the middle of baking. "Miss Gray?" the woman said, and her voice was warm and welcoming. "I'm Mrs. March, the housekeeper. Welcome to Blackwood Manor. I'm so sorry about the rain, it's been dreadful all week. Come, I'll show you to your room. You must be exhausted after such a long journey." Helena followed Mrs. March up the stairs, and as she walked, she could not help noticing the neglect that had crept into every corner of the house. The carpets were worn, the wallpaper was faded, and the air had a faint, musty smell that spoke of rooms that had not been aired in years. The house was not unloved exactly, it was simply unlived in. "You must think it very grand," Mrs. March said, as if she had read Helena's thoughts. "And it is in its way. But it's too big really. Too many rooms, too many memories. The late Lord Blackwood loved it, but he was the only one who could ever fill it." "The late Lord Blackwood?" Helena asked. "I understood that the children's father was still living." Mrs. March's face tightened, just for a moment, and then smoothed itself into a careful blankness. "Mr. Blackwood is the children's uncle," she said. "Their father, Lord Blackwood, died 3 years ago. Their mother died shortly after. Mr. Blackwood has been their guardian ever since." Helena nodded. She had been told the basic facts, of course: 2 children, a widower uncle, a remote estate in the north, but the details had been sparse. She had assumed that the children's father was alive and well, merely inattentive to the business of hiring a governess. She had not realized that she would be walking into a house still shrouded in grief. They reached a door at the end of a long corridor, and Mrs. March pushed it open to reveal a small, cozy room that was a welcome contrast to the grandeur of the rest of the house. The walls were papered in a soft, faded rose, and the bed was covered in a patchwork quilt that looked as if it had been made by hand. A fire was burning in the grate, casting a warm, golden glow across the room, and there was a small writing desk by the window, with a vase of wildflowers on it. "This will be your room," Mrs. March said. "It's not much, but it's comfortable. And the view is lovely. You can see the gardens from here when the weather is fine." Helena walked to the window and looked out. The gardens were wild, overgrown, a tangle of roses and weeds that seemed to have been left to their own devices for years. Beyond the gardens, she could see the moors, stretching out to the horizon in a vast, empty expanse that took her breath away. "It's beautiful," she said, and she meant it. Mrs. March smiled. "I'm glad you think so. Not everyone does. Some people find it too bleak, too lonely. But it has a beauty of its own if you know how to look for it." She paused at the door, her hand on the knob. "I should warn you, Miss Gray. The children, they have not had an easy time of it. Their mother's death was sudden, and their father's was not much after. They have been through a great deal, and they do not always," she hesitated, "they do not always trust easily. But they are good children. Bright, clever, loving. They just need someone who will be patient with them." "I understand," Helena said. "I have worked with difficult children before. I know how to be patient." Mrs. March nodded, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she was not entirely convinced. "Well, I shall leave you to settle in. Dinner is at 7. Mr. Blackwood will not be joining you. He takes his meals in his study, but you will be welcome in the dining room." "Thank you, Mrs. March." The housekeeper left, and Helena was alone in the small room. She set her valise on the bed and began to unpack her meager possessions. 3 dresses, a spare pair of boots, a few books, and a small framed miniature of her mother, which she set on the writing desk. She had not many things. She had learned over the years that it was better not to accumulate things, because things had to be carried and she was always moving on. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room. The fire was warm, the rain was still falling, and the silence was absolute. She could not hear the children, could not hear the servants, could not hear anything but the soft patter of the rain against the window and the occasional sigh of the wind in the chimney. She thought, "I am alone. I am completely, utterly alone." It was not a new thought. She had been alone for years, moving through the world like a ghost, visible but not seen. She had grown used to it, had learned to find comfort in her own company, had taught herself to be content with the small pleasures of a quiet life. But sometimes in the quiet moments, the loneliness crept in like a tide, and she felt as if she were drowning in it. She lay back on the bed and closed her eyes. She had traveled all day and she was exhausted. She would rest for a few minutes, she told herself, and then she would go and meet the children. She met them the next morning, in the schoolroom that had been prepared for her. It was a large, airy room on the 2nd floor, with tall windows that looked out over the gardens and the moors beyond. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with volumes of history and science and poetry, and there was a large oak desk in the center, with a globe and a set of maps and a collection of fossils that had been arranged with evident care. The children were waiting for her when she arrived. They were sitting on a small settee by the window, 2 small figures in dark clothes that seemed too formal for their years. The boy was about 8, with his father's dark hair and his mother's serious eyes, and he was holding a book in his lap, though Helena suspected he was not reading it. The girl was younger, perhaps 6, with blonde hair and a face that was too pale for a child her age. She was clutching a doll that had seen better days, its dress torn and its hair in disarray. "Good morning," Helena said, and she smiled at them. "I am Miss Gray. I am your new governess." The boy looked up at her, and his eyes were cold, guarded, the eyes of a child who had learned not to trust. "We did not ask for a governess," he said. "We do not need one. We can teach ourselves." Helena did not bristle. She had been challenged before by children who had been hurt and were trying to protect themselves. "I am sure you can," she said calmly. "But your uncle thought you might benefit from a little guidance. And I, for my part, should like to get to know you. What is your name?" The boy hesitated. "Thomas," he said finally. "Thomas Blackwood." "And you?" Helena said to the girl. The girl did not answer. She was looking at Helena with a strange, wary expression, and her grip on her doll had tightened. "Her name is Catherine," Thomas said, and his voice was flat. "She does not speak much. Not to strangers." Helena nodded. She had encountered children like Catherine before, children who had withdrawn into themselves after a trauma, who had built walls around their hearts to keep out the pain. It would take time to reach her and patience, and the kind of gentle persistence that could not be forced. "Well, Catherine," Helena said, and her voice was gentle. "You do not have to speak to me if you do not want to, but I should very much like it if you would listen. I'm going to read a story and I think you might like it. It is about a girl who lived in a castle on the moors and she had a doll who could talk." Catherine looked up, and there was a flicker of something in her eyes, curiosity perhaps, or the beginning of trust. She did not speak, but she did not turn away. "Shall I begin?" Helena said. She reached for the book she had brought, a worn volume of fairy tales that had been her own as a child. She opened it to the first page and began to read, her voice soft and steady, and as she read, she could feel the children's attention slowly turning toward her, like flowers turning toward the sun. Thomas did not relax. He was still guarded, still watching, still waiting for her to disappoint him. But Catherine leaned forward slightly, her grip on her doll loosening, and Helena saw a flicker of something that might have been hope. She did not meet Mr. Blackwood until the third day. He had been absent from meals, absent from the schoolroom, absent from everything, and Helena had begun to wonder if he was a ghost, a figment of her imagination, a story that the servants had invented to explain the emptiness of the house. She was in the library, searching for a book on natural history that Thomas had expressed an interest in, when the door opened and a man walked in. He was tall, with dark hair and a face that was handsome in a harsh, angular way. His clothes were impeccable. He wore a dark coat and a white cravat, and his boots were polished to a high shine, but there was something about him that suggested he had not been sleeping well. His eyes were red-rimmed, and his jaw was tight, and there was a tension in his posture that spoke of a man who was barely holding himself together. "Miss Gray," he said, and his voice was clipped, businesslike. "I am Mr. Blackwood. I apologize for not greeting you sooner. I have been occupied." Helena set down the book she had been examining. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood. I understand. This is a large house and you must have many responsibilities." He did not acknowledge her attempt at politeness. "I have been told that you are a competent governess," he said. "I trust that is true. The children require the best instruction. My brother's children, I should say. I would be failing in my duty if I were to give them anything less." "I shall do my best to satisfy you," Helena said, and she could not keep the edge out of her voice. "I have been a governess for 5 years. I have never had a complaint." He looked at her then, and something flickered in his eyes. "You are very young," he said. "I had not expected someone so young." "I am 25, Mr. Blackwood. I hardly think that counts as young." He did not smile. He did not even seem to hear her. He was looking at her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable, as if he were trying to see through her skin to the bones beneath. "The children have suffered a great deal," he said. "Their parents died within 3 years of each other. Thomas was 5 when his father died and Catherine was 3. They do not—" He paused and his voice dropped. "They do not trust easily. They have learned that the people they love leave them. They do not want to love again." Helena nodded. "I understand, Mr. Blackwood. I have worked with bereaved children before. I know how to be patient." "Patience is not enough," he said, and his voice was suddenly hard. "They need more than patience. They need someone who will not leave them. They have been left by everyone they loved. Their mother, their father, their grandmother, their nanny. They have been left and left and left. If you are planning to leave, Miss Gray, I would rather you did it now before they grow attached to you." Helena met his gaze. "I am not planning to leave, Mr. Blackwood. I have no plans to leave. I have nowhere else to go." He stared at her for a moment longer, and then he seemed to sag, just slightly, as if the fight had gone out of him. "Forgive me," he said, and his voice was quieter now. I am not good with people. I've been living alone too long. I have forgotten how to be civil." "You are being civil, Mr. Blackwood," Helena said. "You are being honest. I would rather have honesty than civility." He looked at her, and something shifted in his face. "You are very direct, Miss Gray." "I have found that directness is the best policy," she said. "It saves time and it prevents misunderstandings." He almost smiled. It was not quite a smile, it was more like the ghost of one, a flicker at the corner of his mouth that was gone almost before it had begun, but it was enough to make her feel as if she had won a small victory. "Very well, Miss Gray," he said. "You shall have your directness. I expect you to do your best with the children. I expect you to be patient with them and to be honest with them and to be kind to them. They have been disappointed too many times. I will not have them disappointed again." "I understand," she said. "I shall do my best." He nodded and he turned to leave, but at the door he paused. "Miss Gray," he said, and his voice was strange. I am sorry that I have been absent. I should have greeted you sooner. I should have. He stopped. Forgive me. I'm not used to having people in the house. It has been just the children and me for so long. I do not know how to. I understand, Mr. Blackwood, Helena said. I'm not used to it either. I am used to being invisible. He looked at her, and for a moment she saw something in his eyes that she could not quite name, a recognition, perhaps, or a kinship. Then he turned and left, and she was alone in the library, with the book in her hands and the echo of his voice in her ears. She did not know what to make of him. He was cold, distant, closed off from the world, and yet she had glimpsed something beneath the ice, something that was trying to get out. He was a man who had been hurt, and who had retreated into himself to avoid being hurt again. She understood that. She had done the same thing herself. The days fell into a rhythm. Helena would rise early, dress in her plainest gown, and go down to the schoolroom where the children would be waiting. Thomas would be reading or practicing his Latin, or working on his sums, and Catherine would be sitting by the window, her doll in her lap, watching the world go by. Thomas was brilliant. Helena discovered that on the second day, when he recited a passage of Virgil from memory and then corrected her pronunciation of a word. He had been taught by his father before his death, and he had learned well. He was hungry for knowledge, voracious for it, and he would spend hours in the library reading everything he could find. Catherine was different. She was not unintelligent, far from it, but she was withdrawn, distant, and she had little interest in her lessons. She could read, but she did not want to. She could write, but she did not see the point. She spent most of her time with her doll, talking to it in a low, murmuring voice that Helena could not quite hear. Helena knew that she had to reach Catherine, but she did not know how. She tried everything, stories, games, songs, even drawing, but nothing seemed to break through the wall that Catherine had built around herself. The child would listen, and she would nod, and she would do what she was told, but there was no enthusiasm in her, no spark of life. It was as if she had been hollowed out, as if the grief had taken everything that had made her a child and left only a shell. Thomas was not much better. He was bright, yes, and he was engaged, but he was also cold, distant, as closed off as his uncle. He did not trust Helena, that was clear, and he was always testing her, always trying to find the flaw that would prove that she was just like everyone else. It was exhausting, and Helena found herself lying awake at night, wondering if she had made a mistake in coming here. And then, one afternoon, something changed. It was a Thursday, gray and rainy, and the children were listless and restless. Thomas had finished his work early, and he was sitting by the window, staring out at the rain. Catherine was on the floor, her doll in her lap, her thumb in her mouth. "Miss Gray," Thomas said suddenly, "why did you become a governess?" Helena looked up from the book she was reading. "Why do you ask?" "I want to know." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were serious, too serious for a child. "Everyone who comes here has a story. The servants talk. I have heard them. They say that you are different, that you came from somewhere else, that you had a different life before you came here. I want to know what that life was." Helena was silent for a moment. She had not expected this question, and she was not sure how to answer it. She had told her story so many times to so many people, that it had become a script, a performance, something she could recite without thinking. But this child, with his serious eyes and his too old face, was asking her for the truth, and she did not know how to give it to him. "I was a child once," she said, and her voice was soft. "I had a mother and a father, and we were happy. But my father died when I was young, and my mother was not able to care for me, and I had to go to live with relatives who did not want me. I was not treated kindly, and when I was old enough, I left. I became a governess because I had no other choice. I had to support myself, and I had no skills except my education and my patience." Thomas was silent. He was looking at her with an expression that she could not read. "You are like us," he said finally. "You are alone too." Helena felt the tears rise in her throat. "Yes," she said. "I am alone. But I have learned to be content with my own company. I have learned that there is a strength in solitude." The door opened and Mr. Blackwood came in. He stopped when he saw them, his eyes moving from Helena to the children and back again. "I am sorry to interrupt," he said, and his voice was stiff. "I did not mean to." "Uncle," Thomas said, and his voice was brighter than Helena had ever heard it. "Miss Gray was telling us about her life. She was just like us, you know. She was alone too." Mr. Blackwood looked at Helena, and she saw something shift in his face. "I see," he said. "I am sorry to hear that, Miss Gray." "It was a long time ago, Mr. Blackwood," she said. "It is in the past." He looked at her for a moment longer, and then he nodded. "I shall leave you to your lessons," he said. "I just wanted to tell you that there is to be a dinner party next week. I would like you to join us." Helena was surprised. "Me, Mr. Blackwood? I am only the governess. I do not think it would be appropriate for me to—" "You are not only the governess," he said, and his voice was firm. "You are part of the household, and I should like you to be there." He left before she could argue, and Helena was left staring at the door, her mind racing. She had not expected this. She had expected to be invisible, to be a piece of furniture, to be ignored. She had not expected to be invited to dinner. "See," Thomas said, and there was a note of triumph in his voice. "He likes you. He never invites anyone to dinner." Helena spent the next week in a state of quiet anxiety. She had not been to a dinner party in years, not since her father had died, not since she had become a governess, not since she had become invisible. She had forgotten how to dress, how to speak, how to behave in company. She had forgotten how to be a person. Mrs. March, the housekeeper, came to her rescue. She arrived in Helena's room on the afternoon of the dinner party with a gown over her arm and a determined expression on her face. "You cannot wear your usual things," Mrs. March said. "You would stand out like a sore thumb. Mr. Blackwood has asked me to lend you something from the late mistress's wardrobe. She had a great many gowns and she would have wanted you to have one." Helena looked at the gown. It was deep blue silk with a low neckline and a full skirt. It was the most beautiful dress she had ever seen. "I cannot," she said. "It is too fine. I am not." "Miss Gray," Mrs. March said, and her voice was firm. "Mr. Blackwood asked you to join the party because he wants you there. He is not a man who does things without reason. If he wants you there, he wants you to look your best. Now, let me help you into this gown." Helena submitted. She stood still while Mrs. March laced the gown, and when she looked in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. The blue silk brought out the color of her eyes, and the low neckline made her look older, more sophisticated, more beautiful than she had ever felt. "There," Mrs. March said with a note of satisfaction. "Now you look like the lady you are. Go down to dinner, Miss Gray, and enjoy yourself. You have earned it." Helena went down the stairs on trembling legs, and when she entered the drawing room, Mr. Blackwood looked up and she saw his face change. It was not a dramatic change, he was far too controlled for that, but something flickered in his eyes and his mouth softened just slightly. "Miss Gray," he said, and his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "You look," he paused. "You look very well." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood." She curtsied. "Mrs. March lent me the gown. I hope you do not mind." "Not at all," he said. "It suits you." The other guests arrived soon after. A local squire and his wife, a retired general and his daughter, and a clergyman with his sister. They were all polite, all proper, and Helena found herself swept up in the conversation. She talked about the children, about the house, about the moors, and she found that she was enjoying herself more than she had in years. It was not until after dinner, when the gentlemen were passing the port and the ladies were retiring to the drawing room, that she found herself alone with Mr. Blackwood. He had come to the window where she was standing, looking out at the moonlit gardens. "You are a hit," he said, and there was something in his voice that she could not quite name. "The general's daughter could not stop talking about you. She said you were the most interesting person she had met in years." "I am not interesting," Helena said. "I am ordinary. I am a governess." "You are not ordinary," he said, and his voice was firm. "You are the farthest thing from ordinary. You are clever and you are brave and you are kind. You have made my niece and nephew happy. Do you know how long it has been since I have seen them happy?" Helena was silent. She had not known that she had made them happy. She had only been trying to do her job. "You are a remarkable woman, Miss Gray," he said, "and I am grateful that you came to us." She looked at him and she felt a strange, warm feeling in her chest. She had not been touched by anyone in a long time, not really touched, not in the way that mattered, and this man, this cold, distant man, was reaching out to her. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," she said. "That means more than you know." The weeks passed, and Helena began to feel as if she had always been at Blackwood Manor. The house, which had seemed so cold and unwelcoming at first, had become familiar, comfortable, a place she could call home. The children had become her charges, her responsibility, and she had grown to love them with a fierce, protective love that surprised her with its intensity. Thomas was still guarded, still watchful, but he had begun to trust her. He brought her his problems, his worries, his triumphs. He had begun to talk to her about his father, about his mother, about the things he remembered and the things he had forgotten. And Catherine, sweet, silent Catherine, had begun to speak. Not often and not to everyone but to Helena. She would whisper things in her ear, secrets and confessions, and Helena would listen, and she would hold the child's hand, and she would feel the ice inside her heart begin to melt. Mr. Blackwood was still distant, still closed off, but he had begun to be present. He came to the schoolroom sometimes to watch the children's lessons. He joined them for dinner on occasion, and he would ask Helena about her day, about her past, about her hopes for the future. He was learning to be a person again, and Helena was learning to be seen. It was on a cold, gray afternoon in December that everything changed. Helena was in the schoolroom teaching Catherine her letters, when Thomas burst through the door, his face flushed with excitement. "Miss Gray," he cried, "Uncle has invited us to go sledding. He says we can use the big hill behind the house and he will pull us up on the sled." Helena looked up and she saw Mr. Blackwood standing in the doorway, a slight smile on his face. "I thought the children might like some fresh air," he said. "And you too, Miss Gray, if you would like to join us." "I would like that very much," Helena said, and she was surprised by how much she meant it. They spent the afternoon on the hill, laughing and shouting and falling over in the snow. Mr. Blackwood pulled the children up the hill, and Helena rode down with them, holding Catherine on her lap, feeling the wind on her face and the snow in her hair. It was the happiest afternoon she could remember. And when they finally went back inside, their cheeks red and their hearts full, Mr. Blackwood caught her arm and pulled her aside. "Miss Gray," he said, and his voice was quiet, "I want to thank you. You have given the children something that I could not give them. You have given them joy." Helena looked at him, and she saw something in his eyes that she had not seen before. It was not just gratitude, it was something deeper, something warmer. "It has been my pleasure, Mr. Blackwood," she said. "They are wonderful children. They deserve all the joy in the world." He nodded, but he did not let go of her arm. "Miss Gray," he said, and his voice was barely above a whisper, "I would like to take you to the Christmas ball in the village. It is on the 21st. I would like you to come with me." Helena felt her heart stop. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "I am only the governess. I cannot." "You are not only the governess," he said, and his voice was firm. "You are so much more than that. And I would like you to come with me. Please." She looked at him and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Yes," she said. "I would like that very much." He smiled then, a real smile, the first one she had ever seen on his face. And she thought, "I am not invisible anymore." The Christmas ball was held in the village assembly rooms, a large, whitewashed building that had been decorated with holly and ivy and candles. The music was lively, the food was plentiful, and the whole village seemed to have come together to celebrate. Mr. Blackwood and Helena arrived in his carriage, and when they walked through the doors, Helena felt the eyes of the room upon them. She was wearing the blue silk gown again, and her hair had been dressed with small white flowers, and she felt beautiful for the first time in her life. Mr. Blackwood was attentive, gracious, and he introduced her to everyone he met. She danced with the squire and the general and the clergyman, and she even danced with Mr. Blackwood himself, his hand on her waist, his eyes on hers, his voice low in her ear. "You are the most beautiful woman in the room," he said, and she could not help but smile. "You are biased," she said. "I am not biased," he said. "I am honest, and I have never been more honest in my life." The night went on, and Helena felt as if she were floating on a cloud. She had never been so happy. She had never felt so alive. And when the ball was over and Mr. Blackwood handed her into the carriage, she felt as if the whole world had changed. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "I have not enjoyed myself so much in years." "Neither have I," he said, and his voice was soft. "I have not enjoyed anything so much in years." They rode home in comfortable silence, and when they arrived at the house, Mr. Blackwood helped her down from the carriage and walked her to the door. She turned to go, and he caught her hand. "Miss Gray," he said, and his voice was strange, "I have something to ask you. I have been trying to find the courage to ask you for weeks." Helena looked at him, and she felt her heart racing. "What is it, Mr. Blackwood?" "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, and I know we have not known each other long, but I cannot imagine my life without you. You have brought light into my darkness. You have made my children happy. You have made me happy. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Helena stared at him. She had not expected this. She had not expected anything like this. But as she looked at his face, she realized that she had been waiting for it, hoping for it, dreaming of it. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, in the moonlight, and the snow fell around them, and the whole world seemed to be holding its breath. The wedding was small, quiet, intimate. The children were there, and Mrs. March and a handful of the servants. Helena wore a white gown that had been her mother's, and Mr. Blackwood wore his finest coat, and the vicar spoke the words that bound them together for all eternity. "You are my wife," Mr. Blackwood said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "You are my wife, and I will never let you go." "You are my husband," Helena said, and she was crying, but she did not care. "And I will never leave you." They had a small reception in the house, and the children were too excited to eat. Thomas kept telling everyone who would listen that his uncle and Miss Gray were married, and Catherine clung to Helena's hand, her face bright with joy. "Will you stay with us forever?" Catherine asked, and her voice was so full of hope that Helena's heart ached. "I will stay with you forever," Helena said. "I will never leave you. I promise." And she meant it with all her heart. That night, when the house was quiet and the children were in bed, Helena and Mr. Blackwood sat in the library, the fire crackling in the grate, the snow falling outside. They were both quiet, wrapped in the warmth of the moment. "Are you happy?" Mr. Blackwood asked. Helena smiled. "I have never been happier," she said. "I have never been more content. I have never felt more at home." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I feel the same," he said. "I have been alone for so long. I had forgotten what it was like to have someone to share my life with. And now I have you, and I will never let you go." They sat together in the library, the fire crackling, the snow falling, the night stretching out before them. And Helena knew that she had finally found her place. Her home. Her heart.